Now I want to talk about how we're going to get paid. Have you ever received those DMs on Instagram or Twitter or like text messages or emails? Hey, what are your rates? Well, I'll tell you what, if a client reaches out like that and does it in that way, I'm not sure that you really want to work with them. So my response would be, it's going to cost you an arm and a leg. Let's go get paid. What's up, you gorgeous people? Welcome back to the channel. If you are new here, this is a place where I help entrepreneurs with their creative endeavors, helping you build and scale so that you can do the things that matter. And today, I really want to help you get paid. I think after this video, you are going to be so many steps closer to getting paid doing that client work. Now, I do want to preface here that I am an entrepreneur. It has been like, that's the longest professional title that I've had among all of the titles that I've had in my working career. So I've gone to the negotiation table a lot. Now I've got some tips and tools that are going to help you with your negotiation and getting paid, regardless of what you're doing, but specifically I'm going to be referring to filmmaking and photography. But like I said, what I'm going to share with you is going to help you in a lot of negotiation endeavors that you are about to embark on. Now the arc of this video that I want to keep referring back to, the tools and what's in the toolbox here, is the value proposition. That's the biggest thing that I want to refer to when we talk about the arc of this video. When the client is constantly leading back with price, you as the creative, you as the business owner here have to continue to lead with the value. But before we get into that, we need to talk about the mindset. I've had people concerned and afraid and worried about, because they're a solo endeavor, they're just a single business owner, and they've had clients reach out to them that, let's say, have 50 employees, 100 employees, or even more. Going to the negotiation table, whether virtually or in person, can be a bit frightening. But the mindset that you really have to get over, folks, that you really have to start thinking about is that you're a business. Regardless of whether the project goes to something, to a lane that you're going to be doing all the work, or it needs to be scaled up to where you need to hire people, well, yeah, you can hire people to do that stuff. So don't worry about it. Your business and their business. And this is a business to business conversation. Now, the mindset also has to go with the psychology of the client and having a conversation with the client when we talk about what it is that they're after, their pain points. What is the solution that they're looking for? Are they looking to shift their brand in a different direction? Are they looking to launch a new product? Is this a revenue goal? So these are all of the things that you need to be thinking about and having a conversation about, not only because it shows that you care about their business, and you should care about their business because this could be a long-term client for you. It's a possibility, but it just really shows that you want to truly offer some value to this client, that you're not concerned about being a line item on their profits and losses, like you're not just a one-off, like you really care about the solution and the deliverable here. Now, before you've even gone to talk to the client, whether on the phone, whether you've reached out, I highly recommend doing some research on that client, doing some research on that brand. Is it a product or service that you have used before, that you'd be interested in using, that you know somebody out there that's used it? Or also, is it a product or service that you've actually done some work for? So like, is there a similar business that you've done some work for that you can actually refer them to and say like, yeah, we actually did this piece of creative for this business that's in a very similar lane as you. This is how we help them solve their problem, and this is what we use. Like, this is what we gave them. Now, for the skeptics out there who have said like, wait a minute, we haven't even talked about the budget yet. We haven't even talked about the numbers. All right, let's talk about the budget. Because I do like to steer away from talking about the budget right from the get, because I really do want to get into that client's head. I really want to know about what's going on, because I could say like, oh yeah, we've got drones, we've got all this camera gear, we have access to all this stuff. Listen, the tech is the vehicle to the destination. We actually need to talk about why we're headed there. Like, what is the reasoning we're headed to this destination? So when we talk about the budget, I know many of you might say, if I were to refer back to the client, ask them what their budget is, that might be very standoffish. They might be like, wait a minute. Like, we want to know what your prices are. It's not really about ripping control from this client. It's about actually giving them back some control, but also allowing you to not leave money on the table either. Because if the client from the get, you're talking about the work and the creative, and you're thinking like, oh yeah, I could do this for like $2,000, but the client actually budgeted say $5 or $8 or $10,000 for this project. Well, yeah, they're likely going to accept that $2,000 offer for you to do that work. But in my mind, I'm thinking like, wait, we budgeted this much money and this person or this agency is able to deliver it in two. Either like we totally like were off base with our budget, or this person has no idea what they're doing, and I'm a little concerned about getting this product or this deliverable for $2,000, especially if their budget was much higher. And as I'm talking to that client about their budget, I want to reassure them that I'm not looking to blow their entire marketing spend here. In fact, I pride myself on giving a deliverable under budget. I like to actually work and deliver under budget if I can possibly do that, because ultimately that can set me up for a longer term relationship down the road. Rewinding back to what your budget is, you should actually know what your costs are, what your cost to do business is. Now, we're not going to get into the whole intricacies of what it costs for you to do business. However, I do have a spreadsheet that I can't share directly, but I will refer you to Lizzie Pierce and Chris Howe. They have put together a spreadsheet, and I'll link that below, where you can get that for free. And that allows you to kind of look at what those costs are for pre-production, for the production aspects, for licensing like footage, just putting all of those numbers in so that you can start thinking about the budget on your end. What is it going to cost you to do that particular project? And also, like, while you're talking about the budget, and if your client has been sharing with you some revenue goals that they have, or some acquisition goals that they have, or the product launch goals, if you can start kind of crunching some of those numbers as well. And the example here is, if I were to say to you, if you give me $5,000 today and I solve a problem for you and I'm going to be able to give you $50,000 back in the next couple of months, wouldn't you actually give me that $5,000 to do that work to help solve that problem so that you can actually make $50,000? So also think about it from a percentage. Like, if they have revenue goals of, let's say, $250,000, $500,000, $1 million over the next like 6 months to a year, depending on the level of the brand, the product or services that they're in, then you really do have to start thinking about like, wait a minute, like, we might be thinking on a much smaller scale. Even though their budget may be their budget, you might have to start thinking about, if I'm going to solve this problem for them, if my creative is actually going to allow them those revenue goals, we need to kind of take a step back as two businesses to think about what the value is really, because you do not want to leave money on the table. So the budget on both sides really needs to kind of be an ebb and flow, because you do need to think about, as the creative for hire, about the gear that you're going to need, the people that you may need to hire, the licensing, music, and footage if you need that for this particular project. So that's where you need to start thinking, and that's what's going to be happening as you start talking about the scope of work. So as the conversation of the scope of work happens, when the client is telling you, well, this is what we visualize, this is how we are seeing things, this is what we'd like to do. When you look at that scope of work and you're starting to talk with the client about the scope of work, you can't necessarily give them all of the costs right then and there, but you could probably give them a ballpark. However, I always recommend not giving them a hard number to work with. And if they're really curious, honestly, you could say like, okay, I did this for this client and their budget was $2,000 and this was the deliverable. I worked with this client and their budget was $5,000 and this was the deliverable. And then so on and so forth. Like, if you have a $10,000 budget, and they can kind of look and be like, oh yeah, well, $2,000, I don't know. Like, I like that $10,000. So maybe we can go back to the table and figure out how we can pull more into this marketing budget to get to that, because that's the kind of creative that I want to be doing for my business. So that's what we want you to do. So allowing them to see the different like scales of deliverable can be very helpful for both sides. Now, if the client actually wants to hire you to come in and talk about some of the creative aspects and pitch you a little bit further, and they're like, okay, what is your hourly? We'd love to hire you for like a couple of hours. I shy away from the hourly like nobody's business, because I use hourly that goes anything above and beyond the scope. So once you've negotiated the deal and you've got the scope of work and you've got the contract, If there's a round of revisions that you allow, let's say 2 or 3 rounds of revisions, but if the client wants more and it's in the contract that it's going to cost them a certain amount per hour for said post-production, editing, or further licensing or whatever, I always stick with the hourly on that perspective. But when it comes to actually meeting with the client or having to go over some creative, then I always recommend either a half-day rate or a day rate. And the way that you can come up with this is thinking about, okay, let's hypothetically say that you're working on a project right now. What would it take for you to remove yourself from that project to go talk to the client? What are the costs involved so that you not only, you're not losing money, but you're actually making some money as well. So what is your time worth in a flat rate? When it comes to the hourly, like both sides are like clock watching, because they're like, hey, he's only here for 2 hours, so we got to get through this. We've got to get through and distill down what it is that we need. No side is going to have any value here. You're not going to get enough of the context, and they're not going to get enough of what you can offer as far as a solution. And going back to what I said as far as like a longer term relationship, if you really feel like you can knock their socks off and you can provide a really good solution for them, and this could be a very fruitful endeavor long term, this will also allow you to think about that budget in a different way as well. Because you may think like, okay, if this is like a one-off project, then maybe we would charge, $10,000. However, if this is going to be a longer project, could we see ourselves like, where could we trim? Where could we actually offer some value to the client and we'd be able to afford this and maybe knock some of that off of our fee? Like, we have a really good feeling we're going to totally take this one home for them, and we're likely going to get hired for some other work, rather than looking at a 10,000 one-off versus like over the course of like the next year. Maybe you've got budgets that are 25,000, 50,000, so on and so forth. I know that might sound ridiculous, but that is definitely the way things have worked for me in the past with certain clients. I felt the need to jump back in here for the skeptics. So these situations do exist. They can for you. You can remain a boutique business. You can remain small if you want, but you have to think big picture and long term. So scale things up as you need to, but this is possible. Let's get back to it. And the last tool that I really need to offer up here and leave you with is the negotiation process itself. I always recommend, and many do, to actually start high, because you're allowing the opportunity for not only like you're going in high and you're covering your costs and you're making a profit, you're also giving a little bit of wiggle room for your client, because a lot of times they were going to come back with a counter. They're going to come back and say like, okay, well, that number doesn't quite fit in our budget, or that's not what we were really thinking about. And then they can actually come down. And if you have like a ceiling, or a floor rather, like if you have a floor of like, okay, we can't go below this, we just can't possibly do that, and you allow a little bit of wiggle room in that negotiation process, it's much better to start high, negotiate down, versus starting low and negotiating up. You get all of this stuff in writing, you have contracts put together, and you sign those contracts. You make sure that if there's anything that goes above and beyond that scope of work, that you do have an a la carte or itemized section for that client to review. So if they're asking for more, you can refer back to the contract to say, well, it's gonna cost this. All right, folks, so hopefully you've got some tools here that's gonna help you level up your negotiations, getting paid at doing the things that matter. I point you down to the descriptions, especially for that spreadsheet, and also for questions and comments, helping you negotiate this process. What are your pain points when it comes to negotiations? I would love to hear from you. And as always, go out there and do those things that matter. You keep rocking those faces. And really, folks, your time and attention is so important to me, and I really cannot wait to catch you right back here, right back there, wherever you are, on the next one.